For those of you just joining us, welcome. And for those who have stuck around from the start, an extra special thank you. I'm Sarah Burney. I'm the curator of the exhibition, and we are at the end of the day, so I'm going to jump straight in. As the past panels have illustrated so beautifully, Krishna Reddy was an integral node of art communities of Europe, New York, India, and hugely influential within the global printmaking community and the South Asian diaspora especially. Despite his cultural significance, he has remained somewhat an artist's artist, even in New York, where he lived for over 25 years, training generations of printmakers at NYU. His last solo institutional exhibition was 40 years ago at the Bronx Museum. Things did begin to shift in the last decade in tandem with a growing interest internationally in Indian modernism. Reddy was the subject of a sprawling retrospective at the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts in India. He was included in the group exhibition Approaching Abstraction at the Rubin Museum of Art in 2012. And our first panelists, Navina Najat Haider and Jennifer Farrell, included him in their exhibition Workshop and Legacy, Stanley William Hayter, Krishna Reddy, Zarina Hashmi at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2016. 2025 is Krishna's centenary year, and it has brought fresh interest in his work with multiple presentations. In India, the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore mounted a beautiful solo exhibition. Experimenter Gallery, which has represented Krishna and now his estate for over a decade, presented Of Friendships, Krishna Reddy and His World, an exhibition of Krishna's works and those of his peers, students, and mentor. And in America, as well as Heaven in a Wildflower, Krishna is included in the group exhibition Body Transformed, Contemporary South Asian Photographs and Prints at the National Museum of Asian Art at the Smithsonian Institute, curated by Carol He, who's here. And the solo exhibition, Krishna Reddy, The Movement of Life, is opening August 1st at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and that's curated by Heather Hughes and Neeraja Poddar. So this collective uplifting of Krishna's practice has created the best kind of curatorial study group. And I'm so excited to have this very nerdy curatorial opportunity to convene together and talk about our individual efforts in engaging with Krishna's legacy today. We're going to start, however, with a short video from Prateek Raja, co-founder of Experimenter Art Gallery. This is Prateek and Priyanka, the co-founders. Due to technical and geographical time constraints, this is also a pre-recorded presentation. And Prateek will not, unfortunately, be joining us for a Q&A, but we are including their contact information should anyone want to reach out to the gallery directly. And I wanted to include Prateek and Priyanka in this conversation because in many ways, in the absence of solo institutional presentations, the meatiest bites of Krishna's practice that I definitely had in the last decade were through the multiple solo exhibitions Experimenter mounted. And when I began thinking about this show, I really was building on the conversations and the themes that they had explored in their exhibitions. For his presentation, I asked Prateek to share their latest exhibition Of Friendships, Krishna Reddy and His World with us. And I also asked him to spend a little bit of time sharing their experience working with Krishna for over a decade, how they've navigated his significance within art history and his almost the market-averse elements of Krishna's practice, and their thoughts on this moment for Krishna and why this is happening for him now.
Hello, and thank you for having me on this panel today. Firstly, thanks are due to Sarah Burney for curating this incredible exhibition, Krishna Reddy's solo Heaven in a Wildflower at the Print Center. It's a beautiful exhibition, and I'm so happy that all of you are here to see this exhibition. Also, gratitude and thanks to the Print Center New York and the entire team. They not only understood the relevance of Krishna's practice and to tell the story in a renewed way, but they also understood the essences of his ideas of camaraderie and friendships, qualities that need to be celebrated and spoken about even more in today's times. And finally, thank you to our comrade and our dear friend, Judith Reddy, without whom most of this would not be possible. She and we go back so long, and from the very beginning, we've always enjoyed the generosity and the spirit of care and friendship that you have shown us with Krishna's work during Krishna's time and also continues to afterwards. So thank you, Judy, for being on this journey in celebrating Krishna with us. Sarah's asked us seemingly simple questions, but when you look at them and you read them and try to answer them, Priyanka and I feel that they are not so simple to answer. Yet I will attempt, and I hope you get something out of my short piece here. My first meeting with Krishna was about 15 years ago, and at his studio, and I was totally fascinated with the studio, and I knew the practice well, but I never had met Krishna. But when I met Krishna and I saw the works with fresh eyes, it revealed to me this amazing personality that brought art and life together in an incredible way. Krishna was trained in Shantiniketan initially, and of course had the huge influence of his teachers behind him. J. Krishnamurti, the amazing philosopher, and his other teachers, Nandalal Bose and Ramtinkar Bej, his art teachers, really influenced his way of thinking. They made him think about, and I think that stayed with him for the rest of his life, this world where everything came together, this singularity of energy, of force, and this kind of everything coalescing together in one space. That was very much the way Krishna thought of life, the philosophy with which he approached life. When he looked at the this minutest of things and the largest of things together, and they all made sense individually and together. And when he spoke about them, and that's what I remember from my meeting with him for the first time, all of those ideas came together so succinctly, so beautifully, so clearly, not only in his word, but in his practice. When you see his prints, you see his plates, you see his drawings, you see the way he thought about them, the way he touched them, the way he brought his inks together, the way he mixed the oils to change the viscosities. It really brought a practice, not just disparate ways of working, but a philosophy of life together. And I was mesmerized, and both Priyanka and I, when we went to our next trip, were mesmerized with this incredible person who had not only influenced his own generation, but generations thereafter, artists, and who have continued to gain from Krishna's experience and the knowledge he built. So we were only grateful to be able to be on this journey to spread the work of his time and beyond. And this entire time has been full of wonderful experiences, recognitions, and a deeply satisfying feeling of introducing to the world a practice that should have been spoken about in much more detail earlier. But as is common with many artists of their generation, much was left behind, and a lot of it was not discussed or exhibited. And Krishna was, in a way, an incredibly smart person. He was very clear about what he wanted. He was very sure about himself. He moved to New York in the mid-70s from Paris after Atelier 17, where he invented this technique of intaglio multicolor viscosity printing. And that he was interested in really spreading of that technology, that technique, that knowledge, and sharing with the rest of the world and artists and students thereafter how to do that. And that became the focus of his practice. And would that make him market averse? I don't think so. He wasn't market averse. There were things that were constantly being placed during his career and his lifetime, but he wasn't pursuing the market, if you know what I mean. His market was the economics of the practice was only one part of the practice. His larger interest was how he was able to encapsulate this large on this kind of seemingly infinite world into an image or a print or a plate, and that really becomes the essence of his practice. And that significance of artists like Krishna, specifically Krishna, in the longer arc of art history has been kind of seminal and central to so many other artists who have carried his work forward in different ways. But art history somehow missed this opportunity to recognize his work or celebrate his work in a larger way earlier. And now all of that has slightly shifted, especially since we've been working with the estate and with Krishna's work before when he was still alive. We've not only reintroduced his practice to institutions and museums that may have been aware of his work but not had large gaping holes in their narratives, and are now filling those narratives with the right or the kind of wholesome picture of artists from around the world and not just a Western specific context. So artists from the global South and artists from the South are being considered, and Krishna really fits snugly into that category beautifully. But he wasn't just an artist from the global South, he was an artist of the world. And that's where I think a lot of his work and the networks he built beyond the networks that are familiar to us, and the kind of friendships he had created became the cornerstone of his practice. His studio was and continues to be a crucible for learning, a place where artists, both diasporic and American and from around the world, come and learn, and have always been a space where it should be a shared space of caring. And keeping these aspects in mind, and in celebrating Krishna centenary year, into 2024, we did a multi-part exhibition in our galleries in Calcutta and in Bombay in India, called Of Friendships, Krishna Reddy and His World. And it brought together artists from across generations, but also who were all his friends, his colleagues, his peers, his teachers, his students. They all, and the exhibition was made with works that were gifted to by these artists to Krishna, and I'm assuming Krishna would have gifted works back to them. And it really celebrated these friendships that Krishna had built, and it was a special exhibition. It made us think of the influence of Krishna's work across artists and people, and made us, as always, it brings a smile to our lives when we look at these works anew. Every time there's a new discovery to be made. Every time I see Krishna's work, I discover something new. There are beautiful prints behind me, and I'm just a few of the works. I'm sure you'll see the exhibition with the renewed eyes that Krishna makes you see the works, the world with. And I'll end my little dialogue or monologue with a small anecdote. It was early 2000, I think 12 or 13. We were doing an exhibition with Krishna, and there was a printmaking workshop, a viscosity workshop with students from college. And after the workshop, this was in Calcutta and in our gallery in Calcutta. And after the workshop, there was a Skype chat with Krishna, who joined in from New York. And one of the young students very naively asked Krishna, "Krishna, do you work every day, even now, still?" Krishna was already in his 80s. And late 80s. And Krishna looked at him puzzled, almost flummoxed for a second, and then answered, took some time to answer back and said, "Yes, of course I practice. My life is my practice." And that's what the essence of the way Krishna worked was. His art practice was his life, and life was his art. And he brought together these two seemingly disparate ideas together. And it's very evident in his exhibition how these are connected, and how he is able to build a language and an expression of this. I hope you enjoy the exhibition, and I really am grateful for being here, and thank you very much for having me. Have a great day and enjoy the symposium. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for this.
I'm just going to skip ahead. I wanted to begin first with you, Carol, because you've also done something similar in your exhibition, and you've contextualized Krishna among other artists, but this time contemporary South Asian artists.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Sarah, and the staff of the Print Center for inviting me to join today's discussion, and congratulations on the eye-opening exhibition. It's truly wonderful. I wanted to take a few minutes just to quickly show you a few images of the exhibition itself in Washington, D.C. It's currently on view through mid-August, so if you have a chance to get down there. It draws mainly on the Umesh and Sunanda Gore collection. This exhibition presents works by 9 artists and their approaches to the human form in photography and print. And so I'd like to just say at the outset, I took some liberties and was a bit experimental in formal and some conceptual juxtapositions, if you will. So briefly, just in the first, you can stay there actually. In the first 2 galleries, there are works by Pushpamala N. and Claire Arney, Ram Raman, Vivek Vilasini, Naveen Kishore, all of whom, sort of in brief, consider the performing body and notions of social and cultural representation sort of in and through the medium of photography. There's a photo mosaic by Rashid Rana and 2 paintings based on photographs by Jitish Kalat that distort the figure in portraits that oscillate really between reflections of the public being and the inner self. Next slide. Oh, right there, that's fine. As you enter what is really the 3rd gallery space, the focus shifts to printmaking techniques as a means, quite simply, to morph and multiply the body, rendered, of course, with those provocatively carved lines, layered and punctuated by a vivid range of hues. So what you see in this wider view of the gallery is, to the right is a glimpse, the first 2 prints in a series by Chitra Ganesh called A Delicate Line, Corpse She Was Holding, which was produced using her signature drawing into paper and a wide range of sort of materials and intricate layering and techniques. In the center is Jitish Kalat's RSVP, The Closet March, and on the left is the first half of a long wall dedicated to Krishna Reddy's prints. Next slide. It is perhaps an unusual conversation I've set up here, but I was thinking of Jitish Kalat's RSVP, The Closet March, as a way of perhaps echoing the sense of line, repetition, and fragmentation of the body, with certain references to being in an urban context. Briefly positioned between mirrors, the front and back of his body are inverted and multiplied, and hopefully makes a viewer conscious of a certain kind of tension between being confined by and perhaps reaching past the limitations of the picture plane. So that was sort of a lead-in to the Krishna Reddy section on the next slide. So we're zooming in a bit, and this is where I start this section. So I think my approach, if I may, is much better stated by first Rubina Karode, who once wrote of Reddy's early drawings while at Shantiniketan as, quote, attempts to release the torrents of expressive power from the sole image of the human body. And by Reddy himself, who stated, I made a series of drawings of standing figures working in detail from a particular person, slowly evolving toward a more abstract human figure. I ended up with a vertically drawn line, which meant a life force or a life rhythm for me. So those 2 thoughts, if you will, expressions, are kind of what anchored this very tight grouping of just 12 prints. It highlights and perhaps traces a bit of this intensified focus on the figure and its evolution in his own practice in printmaking. So my point of departure, of course, is the work titled Demonstrators, which is also on view right on that wall. A representation of, as he describes it, the crowds, quote, the crowds of people marching, gathering, and talking during the upheavals in Paris in 1968. Here, a figural form is repeated, standing in a dense row from edge to edge, and in a way sort of electrified by those lines, those little briefest of outlines in bright orange. Across, again, this concentrated selection, the distilled figure then becomes, as we hopefully see, a building block, while rhythm and color transforms it into observations on formal relationships and really the human condition. Next slide. This is the next grouping, which attempts to show, at least in the space of 6 prints in what was a prolific practice, but the extraordinary complexity and textural effects Reddy achieved through such evolving techniques as irregularly carved dots, broken streaks of color, which often resulted in a kind of remarkable luminosity in his work over the next 3 decades. So here we see a few examples. We had the praying woman, and then we move into subsequent studies, which really seem to explore the relationship between the individual and the masses. So to get a sense of that progression, I lifted quotes I took from the last sort of great informative exhibition, which was at the Bronx Museum. And it was an attempt to let Krishna Reddy speak for himself in the exhibition. So I'll just run through a few. Underneath each of those prints are reproduced some of these quotes. So just some fragments. 1, 2 simple images emerge from the linear construction, a child wandering away from the mother's fold into the world. Another, I tried reflecting the psychological weight of a mass of people toward an individual person. Another, a row of receding vertical lines were constructed, which proceeded to turn into more and more organic shapes of figures until finally opening up into a full, radiating human figure. And one more, a formation of carved figures arranged in a cathedral structure with a seated figure pointing at a falling human being. So again, these wonderful sort of visual experiences of tensions, of movements, of dynamism that can be achieved through massing and singular forms, all based on this building block of the human figure. And the last, one more. The vitality of his compositions based on the clown figure attests to the ongoing significance of the body in his practice, certainly after he moved to New York in 1976, but also the masterful evolution of his techniques of carving, gouging, and printing. And as I understand it, the great clown print, the great clown plate was one of the largest plates that he had worked and realized at this point. So. Again, it was important to include, I think, that image in the exhibition, and there are 2 there. So an opportunity, at least across 2 iterations, to see how much he would work with hues and colors and depths with the same composition. But the sequence, those 4 prints was, if you move clockwise from bottom right, counterclockwise from bottom right. It was an attempt to capture a bit of the narrative, perhaps, of the way he was perceiving and the metaphor of the clown in his work. So we begin with the clown more or less lost in a horizontal band of performers, and then it begins to rise high above the sort of clapping audience, and then the lines sort of crisscross arcs of people moving further away, and then the head grows, and you see the definition of the nose and the fingers sort of emerge more. Hard to represent here, but obviously when you see it in person, it becomes much more apparent. And again, that selection then culminates with 2 impressions of the great clown. Last slide. The exhibition concludes with 4 familiar signature interpretations of the self-portrait by Jyoti Bhatt. And I include him because Jyoti Bhatt also mentions that his encounter with Reddy's work led him also to hone his printing skills in Italy and in New York during the 1960s. Upon his return to India in 1966, Bhatt would further the art of printing as an artist and teacher. So it was just a moment to recognize the larger constellation of artists and teachers that were inspired by, influenced, whose careers progressed from at least an encounter with Krishna Reddy's works. So it was just a moment. And then the final slide. To just speak a little bit about institutional context. The National Museum of Asian Art, of course, is known as American museums tend to be known for, I won't speak for all institutions, but known for collections of Japanese print. Japanese printmaking is quite well known in the United States. Our collection numbers some, 8 to 10,000 works. And about a third of them date from the 20th century, from some 500 artists. But we don't have any works by Indian artists in a significant way. So this recent gift of this small but significant group of Reddy prints marks an important moment for the museum in that way. It enhances, even in its sort of concentrated grouping, it enhances significantly the breadth and depth of our holdings in the print medium. So I show this as a reminder, perhaps just to myself, but also interestingly from the first session, poses a question, perhaps worth exploring, is the relationship across areas and across time periods to other print artists. In this case, this actually is a work that dates also from 1968 by Kinoshita Tomio, who used woodblock mainly, but was a print artist who, through his patterning and layering and perhaps hints of portraiture in there, sought to somehow convey the suffering and anxiety of the world around him at the time. So perhaps there are some more poetic and perhaps more concrete connections to explore with the print collection. It's also interesting to think about and do more research on how many artists, Japanese artists, passed through Atelier 17, and most likely overlapping with Krishna Reddy in the 60s in Paris. So again, it's merely a slide to pose a question and a reminder, not just to myself, but perhaps to others who might be interested in exploring that topic. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to give you guys a quick time to look at Carol's slides again. And now turning over to Heather and Neeraja, you guys are doing a solo presentation, much like ours.
Yeah, so we're going to use about 25 to 35 prints, and we don't have any installation shots because our exhibition is going to open, but we're hoping we can tantalize you enough to come visit us in Philadelphia. And unlike Carol, who's focused on the human form, our focus is more on natural forms. You know, we've taken a selection of his works, unlike your fabulous exhibition, and arranged them thematically according to the subjects he was most interested in. So there's a water section, there'll be plants and seeds, I guess. And then we are incorporating some of his humans because, like the clown, I mean, you have to have the clown in there. So I think the expectation is that some people will engage with Krishna at that level of, oh, these are natural forms, and we can identify water here, or how are these two fishes? I don't see two fishes in here. I think it's something else. So we're hoping that there'll be some of that sort of engagement. But I think what Heather and I have become really interested in is his philosophy and spirituality that we feel really infuses and comes through in his work. And Prateek so eloquently spoke about it that I feel I shouldn't repeat things he said. But Krishna's, I think, early education in Shanti Niketan had a big impact on how he felt about nature, especially because Shanti Niketan, as some of you might know, was a school university founded by Rabindranath Tagore, where he did away with the sort of bookish learning in a classroom, and he encouraged his students to be out in nature, to sit under the trees and actually learn. And for Tagore, nature was something that could encourage the creative spirit. This is something he said. And I think this atmosphere really had an impact on Krishna's work because there was close observation of nature, but it's not just the appearance of nature, it's also the feeling of nature, which I think comes through in a lot of his works. There is I mean, I think he had an aversion to anything that was static and unchanging. There's always movement, there's always vibration. And I think, we've been discussing everything, that he's trying to capture, the sort of life force that moves through and connects all living beings. And of course, that's where Indian philosophy comes in, whether it's Advaita Vedanta or whatever, the sort of connectedness of everything. So I think these are some of the ideas, with the connection to nature and philosophy that we hope to bring in. And Heather's going to talk a little bit about his technique and how we're going to bring it through with that as well. Sorry, we should have moved the slides forward.
Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so these are just some of the thematic sections. That's water, that's germination, so maybe seeds and plants. And the next slide is, the seeds and plants, and then you have the human figures. And we've just selected some of our favorite works from the ones we have to show you.
Yeah, and I'll just point out in the previous slide is the example that we've chosen that does reflect the human form, that we, focusing on something like that, like three figures or demonstrators, while one can take that to the direction of politics and that moment in Paris, the 1960s, we've selected those that really speak to what Neeraja was speaking to, is this life force that binds all living creatures through nature. So where you can really feel that sort of vibratory force that's there. And then next slide, please. And something else we want to explore with our exhibition is how his working process can be viewed as an extension of this philosophy. And this is something that's come up a few times throughout the day. Before getting into some of the technical ways and interpretive ways we want to bring that into our exhibition, I'll just mention that our title is actually inspired by a quote that is, I believe it is from that 1981 exhibition artist interview, where he actually uses the phrase movement of life on a couple occasions. And in fact, not always in relation to nature, but also in relation to the artistic process. And so I'll just read this out here. He says, "Techniques are not frozen formulas. Take the acid you work with to etch the plate. You must get to know the acid on your own. You are playing with it. You are dancing with it. You are in full sympathy with the acid, inquiring, learning. This is the real joy, the movement of life." And so that's where we took some inspiration for the show. And so one of the ways we are examining this idea of seeing the prints themselves as living entities is looking at several iterations where he returns to the same composition multiple times. So the concept of iteration and variability that we're all familiar with his work. In one sense that will look like changing the color combinations, but in other ways, we're thinking also about how he returns to the plate itself in terms of manipulating the surface, going back and using different carving tools, machine tools to reorient the composition and what kind of magic that yields when he returns to something else and gives it new life again. And in this way, we are extremely fortunate to be benefiting from the expertise of one of our colleagues at the museum, Christina Taylor, who's with us here today. I just want to give a wave, Christina. Christina is both a conservator for works on paper and a printmaker, trained as a printmaker. And so she is always really full of amazing insights into artistic working process, as well as being able to use the scientific techniques and modalities and methodologies of conservation science to get deeper into understanding artistic process. And so in this case, we're looking at two examples of water form that we have in our collection now that are reflections of a moment when Reddy went back to the plate and manipulated it. And so we are going to be showing multiple states of this, proofs and states of this particular print, as well as the plate itself in our exhibition, which we always find is a thrill to our visitors to actually see plates and tools, of course, too. It's, I think, for people who are coming into a museum space that's not a dedicated print gallery, it really helps ground sort of the new people to the world of printmaking. And so I will leave that there.
Thank you so much, both of you. Carol sort of hinted at this towards the end of her presentation, but Heather and Neeraja, the gift from the Gores is becoming part of a very robust print collection that the PMA already has. And I was curious as how the Reddy prints are going to speak to or energize the larger print collection that you have.
So I was actually going to say that the Reddy collection that we've acquired is thanks to the generosity of Umesh and Sunanda Gore, who have given us 63 prints by Krishna Reddy. I think that makes us one of the best, one of the most robust collections of Krishna Reddy prints in the world, apart from Experimenter, but Prateek is not here. So for that, we're very grateful, and for their continued support, because they're big supporters of the museum and of the South Asian Art Department, which is now the Asian Art Department. So I know you said prints, but I would like to add that so many South Asian collections in museums worldwide don't represent prints. I mean, this is again something that you've alluded to, but definitely in our museum's collection, South Asia print side, there's hardly any South Asian prints. And from the South Asian side, again, most historic collections will stop around 1900, and it takes a lot of effort to move into the 20th century with your works of art. So in a way, this gift is transformative, both in terms of expanding the narrative of Indian art temporally, as well as in terms of medium. So I think that's really significant. But I think it's also helping us ask questions about who is an Indian artist, who is a global artist, how do we make these conversations happen, which I think is really important. And I think we've had a lot of fun working together and sorting out some of these ideas.
The print collection at the PMA is immense. The last time it was counted, I want to say it was 120,000 prints. Many of the artists in the collection have passed through Atelier 17, whether in New York or Paris, and so it is an enormous gap that we did not have any work by Krishna Reddy prior to this gift. So just that if we had received just one print, that would have been transformative in telling, as we now know, the extremely global and cosmopolitan story of Atelier 17, particularly in the Paris era, as Christina Weil so beautifully pointed out earlier this morning, is that this was a node of intercultural, interdisciplinary connection during these years. And so to not have Krishna Reddy there, not only as an artist, a participant, but a director, was a gap that needed to be filled. And so we're very excited about that. And then speaking as somebody who, my earlier training is actually as a historian of Renaissance and Baroque printmaking. And so when I think about a new acquisition, I'm also thinking about what does this help us tell the story, the long history of graphic arts, of printmaking, beginning with the centuries ago. And so I think that Krishna Reddy's work can really be put in dialogue and conversation with generations of artists who have tried to address the challenge of adding color to their prints, whether it's in multiple stages or in simultaneous methods. I think I can imagine ways that we can exhibit his work. Now this was a solo presentation we're working on, but there can be future iterations where we put him in that conversation. So, say with Mary Cassatt and her color etchings in the 19th century. We just had a Cassatt show. And then if we want to get super old master print nerdy, for people who know Rembrandt's work, he's an artist who went back to his plates and reworked them, or manipulated the way he inked them and used plate tone to create different effects and variable impressions. So again, we're seeing these things kind of come back over and over again in the history of printmaking. And then the last thing I'll say is I'm really excited to continue Reddy's legacy of being a teacher and an educator. We have a wonderful study room in the Department of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs. Some of you may have been there before. I'm looking at our print curator friends here. And the study room is used by teachers in the Philadelphia region, usually studio art instructors, but also art historians. And so I'm really excited to see how they will make use of works by Krishna Reddy in teaching their students both about technique, but also his approach to abstraction, the natural world, and again, putting his work in conversation with other artists in our collection.
I was going to say, I think that's an important step in not only preserving Krishna Reddy's legacy, but bringing Krishna Reddy's legacy to a wider audience and a various audience, you know, whether they're scholars, students, general public. So I think what is important is that these institutional collections have a certain capacity to activate, implement various activities beyond simply exhibitions. The research fellowships that we support, there are all of these different mechanisms that an institution, the tools that we can leverage, again, and bring to bear on Krishna Reddy's legacy, which I agree has been too long.
And I love that you mentioned audience. That was kind of where I wanted to take this next. I think one of the most interesting things for me, for us as a group, is we all sort of cater to slightly different art communities. Like in New York, I felt like I had 3 audiences I was working with. There was, you know, because of the phenomenal location of Print Center, we get a lot of just walking by traffic, a lot of people who don't know what printmaking is, don't know who Krishna is. They were visiting Gagosian and they stopped by. And so there's a lot of discovery that we're doing. There's a lot of printmakers who know of Krishna, who are kind of familiar but don't know a lot, so they come in. And then there were so many, you know, diehard Krishna fans who were sort of like, finally, a Krishna Reddy show. And I was like nervous talking to them because they knew more than me half the time. And I was just curious if you could talk to your communities and how the different communities sort of affected your curatorial thinking.
You've done your show.
We're in this interesting space, on the one hand, very general audiences, where your audiences might, from Gagosian, end up in here. Our audiences might come from the Air and Space Museum and Natural History and land in our museum. So there is a certain percentage of our constituency that certainly aren't familiar with South Asian printmaking, with printmaking. On the other hand, we also have a fairly loyal audience because the Japanese print collection has been readily on view. In fact, I forgot to mention that that particular image at the end is on view as a happy coincidence in an exhibition called The Print Generation, which is in the gallery spaces literally just above Body Transformed. And in that exhibition, for instance, there are a number of works that center on a new generation of 20th century Japanese print artists that sort of rejected tradition and really revived and reinterpreted the medium and the practice. And in that exhibition, because it focuses mainly on woodblock printing, there's a little explanation of woodblock printing. So there is a kind of familiar audience with prints, but then there is the other end of the spectrum. So speaking to that general audience also perhaps made me think more about these experimental kind of juxtapositions, to draw viewers and visitors in through visual relationships, through text and description that would sort of gently link or draw the visitor or viewer from one work to the next. That may not have that facility with printmaking, history, and technique. So I think, and then it's facing the Chitra Ganesh works. So, you know, there is an abundance of techniques, of layers and hues. And so again, creating an environment that would welcome a general viewer, a general visitor, was sort of the goal here as well. It's an introduction, and by no means is it comprehensive of any of the 9 artists' works, but hopefully a prompt to think in different ways about these artists?
So the space where we're going to be showing our exhibition is typically reserved for the kind of prints that she does. So it's going to be quite a surprise for people to turn the corner and find this. It's also a space that abuts our main exhibition space, so people tend to walk through it. So there's going to be a lot of casual visitors, as you're saying. I think there are going to be print visitors, and maybe you can speak to that in a second. What I think is really interesting is so many visitors who are familiar with South Asian art are just not familiar with Krishna Reddy. I mean, everyone who knows about South Asian art will have heard of Shanti Niketan. They will have heard of artists who went to Paris from India, you know, like Raza. But I think Krishna Reddy is going to come as a wonderful surprise for many people. And I think that's part of the goal, right? To bring him out to the public and show how wonderful his work is.
As Neeraja mentioned, this gallery space that we are exhibiting in is it's a corridor outside of our main exhibition hall. And it's also a major thoroughfare through the museum, which means it does get a lot of eyeballs and a lot of footprints. So that's both a challenge and an opportunity, because it means many people are going to see it, but people who might not be seeking out that material. And so in the past, when I've worked in that space, I try to be pretty generous to that audience, thinking that they might not be as familiar with works on paper or printmaking, let alone the specific artists that will be there. And so that's sort of why we lean into things like explaining some of the process as needed without maybe overwhelming them, but the plate's helpful for that. But you know, just seeing it as a place to introduce them to this artist with really beautiful works that will just grab them in. And even if they don't read a single label, I think they will just really just love the lush imagery of Krishna Reddy.
On time. One of the most sort of amazing surprises for me when I worked on this show is it was almost like 6 degrees of separation from Krishna Reddy. Every third person that I spoke to would mention that he was either their teacher or their teacher was a student of his. And I was just curious if any of those sort of personal connections came up for any of you in your work.
Yes, and I have to admit, it was rather intimidating because I'm on a learning curve, of course, with this work. But dear friend and colleague, Deborah Diamond, who is our curator of South Asian art, took his class at NYU. So, and then there was this moment, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Raman, but there was a moment where I was sort of leading this tour of the exhibition, feeling very self-conscious about my lack of knowledge, deep knowledge about Krishna Reddy. And of course, Ram, who was there watching him carve plates and describe that experience, you know, the depth of the incisions and the work, to really reinforce this obvious point that we all know of how sculptural the process was for him. So there are those 2 moments that stand out, but yes, I felt the same way. There was this sense that he really was, knowledge of him, encounters with him, or even taking classes with him. There was this large network of people that had these, at least felt personal relationships.
More, it's strange. They keep kind of popping up in places that are not directly related to working on this exhibition. So I just recently learned that we have a wonderful supporter at our museum who endows one of our annual lectures every year. And she learned that we have a Krishna Reddy show coming up. So she said, you know, just so you know, I work with Krishna Reddy. If you ever want to talk about him, I'm here. And it's like, okay, duly noted. So that's a new one. So I'll come back with a good story next time. And then somebody else who was a printmaking student of Arthur Florey's at Tyler, which is the art school at Temple in Philadelphia. She was speaking with us about our Florey collection, which we have a nice one, and just happened to mention that she was a Fulbright student to Paris in the 60s. And I said, oh, that's nice, you know, tell me, what was your subject? And she said, well, I went there to study printmaking. There's this place called the Atelier 17. I don't know, maybe you've heard of it. And I was like, wait, Atelier 17, Paris, 60s. Did you work with Krishna Reddy? And then she said, yeah, I did. So I hope to get more information from her, more stories. So, yeah. So I'm building up a Rolodex.
Yeah, the Krishna Rolodex is really, really quite amazing. My last question to us as a group before I turn it over to the audience. I think we can all agree that there's still so much more areas of study for Krishna. And I was just curious what elements of his practice or his life that you hope future scholars will investigate or that you would want to investigate further?
I'm really hopeful that this will spur collecting of Krishna Reddy, of Indian printmaking at the museum, because there's a long, wonderful history of it and we just don't have a representative collection. And to think of Krishna in a global context. This is something Heather and I talk about all the time. She keeps telling me these amazing stories of this person worked with Krishna. So actually making those connections more formally to think about a global printmaking moment.
Carol touched on this a little bit, but I've been thinking about Krishna's work within the context of political activity within Paris and how it might be interesting to put him in conversation with some of the other artists that might be in our collection who have represented those same moments. So we recently acquired a work by a print by Jamaican-American artist Mavis Pusey. Some of you may be familiar with her work. She was in Paris in 1968, and her work from that period is up at the Pompidou exhibition for the Black Paris exhibition. And so it's been funny to see her work for 1968 and Reddy's work in 1968, and it just kind of got some things germinating. And I was like, we didn't touch on this too much, and we won't touch on this really in our show. So to think about Reddy as part of a larger movement beyond technical issues or the natural material.
I agree. The word you use, transformative, it really is transformative to the collections in that it really sparks the desire for looking at these connections and these global connections. Slightly unrelated, but I'm working on another project that opens in June called Cut and Paste. But it looks at Japanese photography, experimental photography, and Japanese prints in a certain period. And it's the simple premise of this kind of analog, very analog experience of reprographic media. But I'm doing this in collaboration with Kit Brooks, who was our Japanese art curator, and they're now at Princeton. And so this kind of dialogue, collaborative project that can happen with the works sort of there, to look at them and to have these conversations in storage and to think about these ideas and these connections, I think is what I'm actually kind of excited about. And I'm thinking could be, with the right sort of partner, I think, expertise involved, begin to look more cross-culturally, across areas, across space at these works.
I'm going to turn over to the audience. Are there any questions for any of us? And this can be a prompt, a question. We have one up here, Elizabeth Wyckoff, who taught me in college, everybody.
Thank you. This has been a fabulous day, and all kinds of questions have come up, and I love, what I wanted to kind of focus on here was thinking about sort of historical references, and I love the mention of sculpture constantly, because thinking about sort of the first book about printmaking was called Sculptura. So sculpture has always been an important piece of printmaking that doesn't always get acknowledged, so it's wonderful that happened. And also, I've been thinking about William Blake a lot recently, and the title of this exhibition is very much, and I'm wondering, my question is, since there are curators up there, I guess the question is about whether Krishna himself had an appreciation for the printmaking of historical figures. Did he love William Blake? Was he interested by? Was he intrigued by innovation in other artists?
I love this question because it allows me to tell you where I stole the title from. So the title is Heaven in a Wildflower, is from one of the opening lines of Auguries of Innocence by William Blake. And in 1998, Krishna published a beautiful essay, which is in our reader, which I should have up here. And he began the essay quoting those two lines by Blake, to see heaven, to see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower. And for me, that so beautifully encapsulated Krishna's philosophy, which was sort of the most important thing for me to try to gesture at in this exhibition. And honestly, my further area of study is I want to explore that relationship further of Krishna and Blake and all the other artists that he looked at. This brilliant photographer, Dave Benegal, has taken some amazing photos of Krishna's studio, which are also reproduced in our book. And one of the great photos is
Support Print Center, New York.
and we sold out of our first run. So this is our second run, which is super exciting for us. And I loved looking at the books Krishna was reading. He was such a, not just he was truly a global intellectual in that he was reading, gosh, now I'm blanking on the name, of course. He was reading Russian writers. He was reading Indian theorists. He was so influenced by Krishnamurti's philosophy. So I really do want to sort of flush that out more in further research. Yeah. And this is Ram Rahman, who knew Krishna personally.
Well, leading off from the last few minutes, my understanding that I built up knowing him for a long time and actually even partly teaching with him at NYU when I had just graduated from art school. The Krishnamurti and Shantiniketan experience, as Neeraja mentioned, was very formative on two levels. One was it was during the nationalist movement, that last decade before we gained freedom from the British. And both of those institutions, Kalakshetra and Shantiniketan, were very involved in that resistance to British colonialism, but through the arts. But when he goes to Paris, the natural world that he came out of, or understanding, gets transformed by his interaction with French surrealism. And the surrealist connection is very strong. And all the artists that he saw or met or worked with in Paris, almost all of them had a strong surrealist background at that time. It had come up in the Second World War. And also in Paris, his left radicalism came out of France, because the Indian part was the nationalist, mainly Congress culture. And these two are very important in how it connects. And that's what connects him to the world movements.
And I think there was a printmaking tradition in Shantiniketan also with wood blocks. Nandalal was doing political prints, and at some point, apparently, he used cement blocks to make political prints for wide distribution. So there's definitely an awareness of printmaking techniques from.
We have a print from Shantiniketan. I should say. Yeah.
Hello, I have a question sort of following up on Elizabeth's comment about the sculptural nature of printmaking and thinking about curating Krishna Reddy. I feel like we've talked a lot about the prints, and Sarah, I know you got to put in 2 sculptures. How is it as a curator of his work to either include or not include these sculptures, most of which I'm guessing don't exist anymore? I mean, I think I'm speaking from a position of ignorance, but those plaster works from the 50s, like where are they?
Yeah, a lot of them either don't exist or they're in private collections and it was cost prohibitive to bring them here. So honestly, it was a little frustrating not to be able to include them. I was very grateful that I could include the two little ones, but what I did get a chance to include, which hopefully sort of gets to the sculptural qualities of Krishna's work, is his tools. So in the vitrine over there, we have Pierre, which was Krishna's plate-making tool. And the body of Pierre is actually Krishna's dentist's drill machine that his dentist was going to throw out. And Krishna was like, no, I can use this. And then he retrofitted it with tools that he found in hardware stores for machinists, jewelry makers, and not artists, more like not printmakers, sculptors. So he sort of was able to weave together his two backgrounds, his sculptural background, into his plate-making toolkit. But I do wish I could have included some of the larger sculptures. I think sculptures that would have been it would have helped me tell, I think, a fuller story of his vocabulary.
Also, I think his sculpture, but also, I mean, clearly his time at Slade, with Henry Moore, with Osip Zadkin, they're an important part of the evolution of the human form, of course, is his experience working in these studios and Atelier 17. I think, but you hit on what is a boring reality, and that is being able to tell that story could be very costly. Yeah. I think in our current reality, just being able to show those prints, I think was the objective, and hopefully to talk about them and dream about those juxtapositions in the future.
I think Experimenters exhibition, one of them had a bunch of sculptures. So, and I think some of them are in India. So
I tried. They're in India.
I think it's very practical considerations. Our space also isn't wide enough to allow it. So, and we don't want people bumping into stuff. So it's often very practical considerations that come into these decisions, I think, as I'm sure you know.
But I think there will be some select cases where we'd like to show any relevant sculpture, in a comparative image on the label, just for people reminded that he had a practice that transcended the printmaking medium.
For like one wild moment, I was like, what if we reproduce photos of the sculptures life size so everyone gets an idea of scale? And Jen talked me down from that. She was like,
I'm sure Jen has something to say about that.
So when does the show open at the Philadelphia Museum?
August 1st, everyone.
And how long will it be on?
December 7th?
It's around in December.
And I think, isn't there a wonderful surrealism show opening at the PMA around then also? Just plugging our institution a little bit.
Hi. Hi. So for some context, I studied at Shantiniketan and I passed out maybe 2 years ago. So in Shantiniketan, studying Krishna Reddy, the primary figure in whose context we study Krishna Reddy is Somnath Hoare, who is another major printmaker in India. And he also went into a practice of sculpture, and there's a lot of comparison made, specifically maybe because Somnath Hoare remained in Shantiniketan and taught there, and he becomes the bigger figure in Shantiniketan. So in showing Krishna Reddy internationally and to a larger audience who probably do not know Somnath Hoare at all, is there any context that is created for those interactions? Or I'm just interested in knowing, is that connection of narratives present at all internationally?
I think there's certainly an interest. I mean, for me, Krishna Reddy, Jyoti Bhatt also, these two figures were a door opening to look at other really important print artists, Somnath Tore, Arpita Singh. I mean, there are certain figures that, Zarina, of course, is known, but there's a core group of very important sort of 20th century print artists that are not known. So, I mentioned this kind of constellation of printmaking, certainly coming from India, from South Asia, is so little known that this feels like what I hope is a kind of first step, at least for some of our American institutions, to be able to start addressing that broader history. So that's a very general answer and a hopeful one, but there is certainly attention and the beginning of a knowledge and recognition of this wider world of printmaking.
Yeah, agreed. My wish is for this to sort of be a base camp and then many projects to sort of come out of it.
I mean, Heather and I have talked about some projects with Krishna in conversation with maybe Atelier 17 artists, but we have some Rabindranath Tagore, et cetera, in the collection. So sometimes our choices are driven by the collection as well, but definitely that is something to aspire to, shall we say.